Conway Twitty was more than a superstar. He was a presence that lingered long after the music stopped, a voice that could pull tears from hardened souls and make strangers feel like confidants. On stage, wrapped in rhinestones and bathed in spotlights, he was untouchable. Fans screamed, hearts raced, and his smooth baritone seemed to carry promises only he could make good on. To millions, he was Mr. Hello Darlin', the embodiment of charm, success, and endless romance. Yet behind the glitter and thunder of applause was a man who lived in layers, keeping his private world tucked away like a diary with no key. When he died, his family expected to unearth the ordinary artifacts of a legend's life. Gold records dulled by time, guitars scarred with use, costumes once dazzling but now faded by decades. What they found instead, in the shadowy corners of his basement, was far more than memorabilia. They uncovered the pieces of a life Conway had chosen to bury, a side of him even his closest companions never suspected, and it changed the story of who he truly was. Born Harold Lloyd Jenkins in Friars Point, Mississippi in 1933, his earliest days were colored by gospel harmonies, cotton fields, and the pulse of Delta blues. He grew up poor but with a hunger for more than survival. Baseball almost claimed him. He was offered a chance to play for the Philadelphia Phillies, but destiny had other plans. Music pulled him harder, and by the late 1950s, he had a hit, It's Only Make Believe, that launched him into the same conversation as Elvis Presley. The world knew him as a rockabilly heartthrob, but beneath the surface he was already imagining something greater, a career that would outlast fads and burn brighter than a single genre. In the 1960s, he crossed into country music, a move that cemented his place in history. Here, he created a signature blend of sensuality and sincerity, pouring himself into songs like Hello Darlin', I'd Love to Lay You Down, and Tight-Fittin' Jeans. His voice was velvet, his delivery intimate, and fans swore he sang directly to them alone. Yet even as his lyrics bared vulnerability, the man himself revealed very little. He kept his interviews safe, avoided public scandal, and rarely opened the door to his private world. For all the passion in his songs, Conway lived like a man determined to guard his heart. The contrast between public and private grew sharper in the 1980s, when Conway built Twitty City in Hendersonville, Tennessee. The sprawling estate became a pilgrimage site, a place where fans could stroll manicured gardens, tour exhibits of his costumes, and imagine they were stepping inside the home of the man whose voice defined their lives. Twitty City was marketed as transparency, a glimpse into the world behind the stage lights. Yet it was also a carefully curated performance. For every door that swung open to display his trophies and faith, others stayed locked tight. Among those forbidden spaces was the basement. Family, staff, and visitors alike understood it was off-limits. Conway himself treated it not as storage but as a vault, keeping it closed even as he invited millions into other corners of his world. To the public, Twitty City was a monument. To Conway, it was also a mask, and the basement beneath it became the one place where his mask could fall. When he died in June 1993, the grief was immediate and overwhelming. Fans flooded Twitty City, clutched his records, and mourned the silencing of one of country's most powerful voices. His family, though, faced a different reality. They had to sift through everything he left behind, a daunting task made heavier by the mysteries Conway had carried in silence. The basement loomed large in their minds as they worked through the estate. For years it had been shut tight, a door Conway himself had guarded. When at last they opened it, the hinges groaned like a warning, and the stale air that spilled out carried more than dust. It carried decades of secrets. The basement was not chaos, but careful arrangement. Boxes stacked neatly, trunks labeled in Conway's handwriting, envelopes tucked into drawers. Some were marked with single words: private, keep, unfinished. The air was thick with the sense of intention, as though Conway knew this day would come, when others would finally descend into the space he had reserved for himself. The first discoveries felt ordinary enough: guitars, sequined jackets, boots scuffed from touring. But as lids lifted and locks gave way, the tone shifted. This was no archive for show. It was a vault of confessions. There were reels of tape, cassettes, and film canisters, each labeled cryptically. When the family played them, the sound that filled the room was not the polished crooner the world adored, but Conway raw, alone with a guitar, pouring out unfinished songs, broken lyrics, or rambling thoughts. Some recordings were diary-like, confessions turned into melody, songs of regret, exhaustion, and doubt. On one reel, he sang of nights in hotel rooms, staring at ceilings, questioning his worth. On another, he confessed the pain of friendships gone sour, feuds buried but never healed. Some tapes weren't music at all, just his voice talking into the machine, confiding fears and disappointments as though it were the only friend he could trust. One was labeled simply Keep, and in it he recounted betrayal by someone he once considered family. Another was darker still, his voice low as he questioned his own legacy, wondering if people would ever know him beyond the man in rhinestones. The letters were just as revealing. Bundles tied in twine, some addressed but never sent. Notes to his children where he admitted his regret at missing birthdays and simple dinners, acknowledging the void his absence had carved into their lives. Drafts of angry letters to fellow musicians and business partners who betrayed him, naming names, recording grudges he never spoke aloud. Love letters, too, some apologizing for romances overshadowed by fame, others quietly mourning connections he never nurtured. A few letters he wrote to himself, diary-like reflections where he admitted, "They hear my voice, but they don't hear me." These pages were filled with the truths he had spent a lifetime shielding from the public eye. Among the objects were reminders of his two worlds colliding. Unopened fan mail by the thousands, gifts for family that had never been given, trinkets from tours, and journals filled with ideas and confessions. One trunk contained toys wrapped for his children but left unopened, frozen in time like promises he never fulfilled. Another was filled with jewelry and cards meant for loved ones but never delivered. These were not artifacts for display. They were fragments of the man struggling to balance his towering career with the family he cherished but often left behind. Then came the darker finds. Legal documents chronicling lawsuits, betrayals, and financial disputes, many of which had never reached the press. Handwritten lists of names accompanied by cryptic phrases like "never again" and "can't trust," suggesting wounds Conway carried quietly but deeply. A wooden box of photographs deliberately cut or burned, faces scratched away, memories erased as if too painful to remember. Tapes labeled "destroy," but preserved nonetheless, carrying recordings of Conway confessing exhaustion, bitterness, and even the thought of leaving music entirely. In one haunting tape, he admitted to secrets he could never reveal, mistakes he feared would undo everything he had built. For his family, the discoveries were staggering. They revealed not the flawless superstar adored by millions, but a man made human by contradictions, generous yet guarded, successful yet lonely, adored yet often bitter. The basement showed the father who missed too much, the artist who doubted himself, the friend who carried grudges, and the man who feared his carefully built image could shatter. And yet, instead of tarnishing his legacy, the basement deepened it. The tapes, the letters, the objects, and the confessions all showed that Conway Twitty's greatness did not come from perfection, but from humanity. His songs weren't just performances. They were extensions of the battles he couldn't name aloud. His voice carried longing not only for fictional lovers, but for the life he sometimes lost in pursuit of fame. The basement turned his silence into sound, his guardedness into revelation. For fans, knowing what was hidden beneath Twitty City changes how his music is heard. Every lyric feels heavier, every performance sharper with the knowledge of the man who sang them. For his family, the basement was both wound and healing, a final message from a father who couldn't say everything in life but left behind the pieces of himself in boxes, journals, and tapes. In the end, Conway's basement was his last stage. Down there, away from cameras and applause, he finally spoke his truth. Not in rhinestones or chart toppers, but in whispers, scratches of ink, and reels of sound that no one was meant to hear. And in that truth lay the greatest revelation of all: that behind the legend was a man as fragile, conflicted, and human as the fans who loved him.